Oh, well, hello, everyone.
Hey,
Yay.
What's today, Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Unfortunately, wish it was Friday.
I'm playing Navy this weekend, so it doesn't matter. All the days blur together for me for the next 2 weeks. Um, all right. Do we have people on here, Mark? People listening to
Sure.
us? Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have people.
Okay. Hey, everyone. My name is Morgan Hill. And who are we? What are we doing here today? Why do we have a webinar? We are Blue Ivy Partners, Rancher Government Solutions, and HashiCorp. And we partner with and serve folks in the federal space who we call mission stakeholders and mission partners to ensure that they have the technology to get their jobs done. And I have three solution engineers and architects on the line with me today, Adam, Mark, and Greg. I'll introduce or have them introduce themselves here in a minute. And these guys have years of experience bridging the gap between those mission stakeholder partners and software developers. So, in my mind, I think of them almost as interpreters. So they speak both languages, the language of the developers and the language of the mission stakeholder partners. So while we're going to talk today about securing hybrid workflows from edge to cloud, we have a few topics we want to talk about. Really, what I want these guys to show y'all is the human side of technology. So, technology from the human perspective, they speak both sides and they're the interpreters. And so they're going to get into the weeds with us today. Myself, I am the director of learning and development at Blue Ivy Partners. And most of my professional background is in the Navy, and it's very largely non-technical. So I am the non-technical, non-expert in this conversation, and I'm going to be asking them questions so that way all of you other non-technical people on the line listening today can understand what they're talking about. They're going to be our interpreters, and I'm going to hopefully ask the questions to get us to that. So without further ado, I'm going to have them introduce themselves. And I don't know how they're showing up on y'all's screen, but I'm going to start with Adam because he's at the top of my screen.
Awesome. Thanks, Morgan. Hello, everybody. I think the four on this call already know who I am, but just a quick spiel, sort of where I come from, what I'm doing today. Right now, I'm chief architect at Rancher Government, but my entire career has been in the federal space. Starting the IC, managing infrastructure and application workloads there. Moved over to the DoD, but I've kind of been in the weeds. I've actually implemented these systems both at scale and at the edge. So I've kind of seen both sides of it. I know a lot of the pain points that exist. I also know how important security is, but how difficult it is to implement security at scale, and making sure that all these environments are actually secured. Because at the end of the day, you're only as strong as your weakest link, and that's incredibly important when it comes to security. These days, in terms of my role now at Rancher Government, I'm making sure that the products that we and the Rancher product suite as a whole are tailored to those unique requirements that the federal government has. Everyone who's out there today is probably dealing with them today: security, compliance, air-gapped environments, all of those things. So really looking forward to today, hoping to keep it loose and have some good discussion.
Nice.
Adam.
Can you hear me, Morgan?
Yeah, I can hear you, Greg. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, loud and clear. All right. Greg Thomas. My last role, I was the resident nerd at the Artificial Intelligence Division before it was cool, in Special Operations Command. And now I'm here as our tech lead in the National Security Group at HashiCorp. And I brought a ball clicker to count buzzwords today. So let's see if I can.
I was going to say one of Greg's rules for today was no buzzwords. So I'm like, I don't even know what the buzzwords are. So I'm probably going to
be clicks through my intro. No, I'm worried.
Well, yeah, we're having fun now. No buzzwords, okay? Yeah. So here's some of the socials. I also volunteer, and I'm gonna be hosting a podcast to empower veteran voices at and you can find that at vetsanddevops.com. There's my social. All right, let's go through here. All right, so when we start the talk today, as we're talking about some of these solutions, I just wanted to show this because this applies to my life every day. Whether you're getting up and you're uncomfortable about something, or you're looking to bridge the gap between IT and security or whatever it is, there's going to be a little bit of discomfort when it comes to automation or any technology that's really worthwhile. And you've seen this since really the dot-com bubble to now with, the rise of artificial intelligence, right? So sometimes getting, the people aspect and getting people out of their comfort zone to adopt a new technology is really where the magic happens. So I just wanted to share that as kind of like my life philosophy and lesson, so you can kind of understand a little bit more about me. And then, what's a HashiCorp? Well, there's lots of different foundations and stuff, and there's no buzzwords allowed, but there's a lot of yak shaving or infrastructure automation that has to go down just to deploy an application, right? I started out as an infantry officer, and I really just wanted to be able to call you Morgan, or, Naval Gunfire, or be able to mass, really cool things. And then I kind of just went down the rabbit hole, never stopped, of like, well, there's all this other stuff that has to go on. So I'll get rid of that slide because it's a lot, and we can talk about it later if you like. All right, so stop sharing. All right, so
I love that, Greg. I always feel like, I'm sure I'm speaking to the masses here, but when I get outside of my comfort zone, I'm always scared and nervous to do it, but then it's always so rewarding. So I love that is your life philosophy. Mark, tell us who you are, and also tell us what's going on with your background.
Yeah. No, I love that. By the way, I always tell my kids that, dude, all through life, be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think, Greg, we learned that in the, infantry real quick, right? I've been super uncomfortable, I'm not going to say that I've cuddled, but I might have. But let me say it's a background Army infantry guy, definitely not an 11 Alpha. Shout out to you, Roger. Did my time there. Been in the tech industry for 12, 13 years. Oh man, I think 14 years now. So everything from working OEM to, hyperconverged cloud, to, big reseller, to now working with the Blue Ivy team as the engineering leader. So really great now that I get the fashion. And the reason I put myself in between these guys, I think it was, did you say misguided, or was it mistrusted, or just a guy that doesn't know anything that you help out, Adam? I'm that guy. I'm the guy in the middle, right? So it's really nice being on this side of it, because I do get to work with guys like this. You, Morgan, that, hey, still that gets to see this stuff on a daily basis. So, yeah, I'm just happy to be right here sandwiched in between these guys.
Great. I'm happy to have all three of you on too. So just for everybody online, if you have any questions throughout, if you are watching on the Talk Studio Streamlabs link, you should be able to shoot those questions over in the chat, and I'll throw them out. We're just going to make this a conversation. So throw those questions in. We'll answer them. I'll have the guys answer them along the way. And I'm just going to start us off with a very basic question. Actually, kind of two questions. What is security, and who's responsible for it?
I can take a stab.
Everybody but me.
So security, actually, it sounds like one of those things that it's easy to define, but when you actually dive into it, it's kind of complicated, very complicated, right? You can look at security in a whole plethora of ways. And as I said before, you're kind of only as secure as your weakest link. Now, like practically, the way I always kind of reference this is you might have a data center that has the greatest firewalls, the most incredible service mesh out there, the most defined rules for things to talk to each other, but you leave the back door open, somebody can walk inside and steal all that hardware and have access to all those things, right? So the one thing I always want to talk about from a security perspective is security is no silver bullet. There's no one layer of security. It's everybody's responsibility at every layer, from your supply chain to your physical security to your infrastructure security, application security, and beyond. So it's kind of everybody buying in and making sure we're all doing better, because there's no perfect security posture for everybody. You just always need to be iterating at every step of that. Greg, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. Is it too soon to talk about Stuxnet? So start with that just as kind of a joke. But yeah, there's a lot in the news on that now. As some of you might know or might not know, I'm writing a book on digital warfare. So I do like history. I like reading all those different things. And I asked an expert the other day, what is the difference between InfoSec and cybersecurity, right? There's the buzzwords, but look, I'm talking about the buzzwords. I'm not saying the buzzwords.
Okay, whatever you want to tell yourself.
That was close. I don't know, man. Like,
Okay. Yeah. So InfoSec, okay. So if you think about information security, could it be something like Stuxnet, where you have a human or a machine that's like you talked about the infantry, right, or like tactics, a patrol base, right? So is that dealing with information security, and then cybersecurity is only digital? I don't know. What do you think, Adam?
That's a good question. I think there's just such a blend, and this is the one challenge with security, that if everybody doesn't buy in, you kind of end up assuming somebody else is managing that security piece, right? It's happened countless times, and I know we're going to kind of dive into the service mesh capability and what that adds in, but there's been so many times from an application perspective that I've been in there where the application assumes the infrastructure, as an example, is taking care of a piece of the security when it's really not. And that's just sitting out there in the nether, but there's no audit mechanism, no capability to come in and verify and validate that that's in place. So
yeah,
I do think that's a major challenge that exists today, in the sense that carving out overarching who's responsible for what pieces of this, so nothing gets kind of through those holes that might implicitly be there.
I think
so. I want to throw.
it.
Well, hey, real quick, Ray, I want to throw something else in there just to kind of little I don't know. Rod in the spokes there. But so you brought up, I think I forgot, maybe it was Adam brought up that point, right? That you have so many people, you have inflection points almost at every turn, right? People at every turn. And we talk about automation and the fact of what we could probably gain from the security aspect. And it kind of brings to mind this thing I got sent the other day, and it's John Connor from Terminator. And he puts his glasses down, he's looking, and he's like, John Connor looking at us while we make friends with AI. And it's kind of funny because you think about it and everybody's like, oh man, that's how the world turned out, right? But in this aspect, could you guys agree, disagree that some of these checks and, leaving the back door open, we can automate in the fact where, hey, it automatically closes the back door, right? Because I think that's a big piece of it, right? When we bring the human into the hardware, into the security, into the software realm, right? There's checks, there's balances, there's baselines that we can achieve to kind of negate some of those, right?
That's a great point, and something that I think, especially in the federal government, the federal government as a whole is kind of in this process of application modernization, right? And the question always comes up, why are we modernizing our applications? They work, right? But one of the biggest things with that is some of the newer platforms that exist out there implicitly have security built into them, right? In a previous life for me, I was managing and maintaining a whole suite of Java microservices that had to talk to each other, right? Every security piece with that was built into a custom framework that every single application needed to build on top of that. You needed an entire team just to manage and maintain the framework, let alone the applications that were built on top of that, right? And it was an absolute nightmare. Every time the framework got updated, every single application needed to go back through integration tests, all of those things. One of the great things with kind of the application modernization and a lot of the justification for doing it now is that security is getting pushed back down to the platform and the infrastructure. So your application developers, those who are kind of building those mission critical applications, can hopefully focus more on the business logic, the things that are mission critical, and worry less about those pieces that are adding those security capabilities on top of it. Because that's realistically what we want those people to focus on, the mission, instead of making sure that all the tools that they're building are implicitly secure.
Yeah, I agree. I think reduction of the cognitive load is incredibly important, and that a common vernacular helps to reduce the cognitive load that we carry. Because think about some of these buzzwords that I talked about, right? Like NIST, it's 2024. They defined hybrid 11 years ago now, right? Have not changed the definition of hybrid. So what is hybrid, right? All these words that we're mentioning can be very scary and confusing, because you mentioned modernization.
It's a buzzword, by the way, Greg.
Right. But what does modernization mean to somebody that's in the CISO shop versus somebody that's in the CTO section, right? Yep. It might be two different things. Do you agree, Morgan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think, okay, so this might be completely off from what the road you were going down, but what is the balance between security and access, security and user experience? Because we were talking before you even hopped on here, Greg, about, having to re-sign into our applications every day or email every day, which is a part of security, but also kind of a pain sometimes. So what's the balance here?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, I think that this is a real thing because that I experienced with user experience. I recently wrote an article about the TSP, right? I used the 401k for the government for all those out there and that don't know is the TSP. And I had a really poor experience with the UX for supposed security for having to do different things that could have been automated with what we call tokens, right? If you think about like cryptography, like a big vending machine, right? Like I need a secret or I need a token. You push that token and then that cryptographically protects that bag of chips or that piece of candy. That's how you automate that process. And when you come back that day, it's there. There's a cryptographic token, but I could tell that the back end of the system lacked the proper security automation to allow my experience to be good. So to most users, they're using something, they might not understand what's going on behind the scenes, but it's very easy to tell, oh, why do I have to keep logging back in every day? That's a poor user experience. Adam, do you agree?
Wholeheartedly. And this is one of those things, if you think back to kind of the inception of the internet or the early days of the internet, back then, you could use password for everything. And most likely when you put password in, it was getting sent plain text over the internet to some backend, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of, I feel like there's two sides. There's the side of the UX, but also the security piece. And both of those are continuously trying to grow to make the UX that goes with both of those a little easier. As an example, back, let's say 3 years ago, I was using a very similar password for most things, right? Now you have password managers out there. Password managers, if you do it right, it makes it trivial for you to manage and maintain your passwords for everything. Obviously, it's still kind of a pain to have to go and sign in every day, but it's not like I have to go and look at a password anymore. So in context of kind of the UX with the security piece, hopefully those things both continue to grow. So as your security needs grow, because let's be honest, the adversaries that are out there, they're just going to keep coming up with new ways to try to infiltrate and attack, right? So that's never going to stop, both in quantity and complexity. They're always going to be trying to be one step ahead. So it's important to be as secure as you can while also maintaining at least a functional UX. So, yeah.
Yeah. And hey, to jump in there real quick. So you bring up a couple good points, right? Adam, one, the targets are different for different areas, right? Some people are into more of like a social presence attack to, hey, I want to infiltrate your businesses, your banking, everything else. And I'm not saying I did it for a reason, but I did put this eye there because I think when you're talking about user experience, you have to talk about the fact that everybody has such a queasy feeling about Big Brother, right? That if I institute this, if I bring this in, how is that going to complicate things with my users? Do they feel like Big Brother's always watching? When, a lot of us that have done this on the back end, that's the last thing I want to do. I don't have enough time. Plus I have 4 kids. I'm already checking up on them. Like, I don't need to go and see what everybody's doing here, right? Like, it's, hey, how do we quantify that and pass it on to our users and say, hey, this is easy. This is kind of what we're doing. And, again, fighting off that same thing, right? There's, we talk about like XDR now and how we actually have businesses that are scanning dark web for their employees, right? Like, there's a lot going on where it might be kind of Big Brother, but at the same time is, it's just kind of like a help and try to lock everything down, right?
Very much so. Yeah.
I feel like, Greg, when you were talking, it was almost like you were having empathy for the systems. You're like, I understand what's going on here. And while it's frustrating for me as the user, I understand it and I have empathy. So I feel like that's a great, it's almost who you are now as your job is you're trying to take that software developer in the back end and explain it to the users. And like we were going down the road just a minute ago, the users also have different things that they're worried about. So depending on what their jobs are, they might understand it a little bit better, or maybe they're just wanting to log in and get their Navy e-learning done and they can't do it from their laptop at home. So how do you kind of smooth that over?
Yeah, so for me, it reminds me of 2 in the morning in Dahlonega, Georgia. Just going around and checking. If you've ever heard of the concept of a patrol base, it's 360 security. And what you got to do at night is you go around and check different positions, and everybody has a different perspective, right? So if you're a squad leader or team leader, if you're on the northwest, northeast, south, whatever, everybody has a different perspective. It's the same thing in information technology or security, and you can take the leadership lessons you learn, from doing patrol bases and apply it there, because everybody's perspective is valid to them, right? There's a perspective that, hey, these are my blinders. This is what I'm doing. So how do you institute control points that they're okay with, and they get buy-in for those control points that allow people to do things faster, like provision infrastructure, connect it, secure it, run it, right? Like common control points. How can you make that easier for people with empathy? That's really the challenge, and kind of, it's also rewarding though when you start to see some of those silos get broke down. It can make my life easier by using this automation. So
Yeah, dang. So you bring up another good point. I think this kind of relates back to how this webinar is too. And you can count me as this is like a buzzword or something, but like a better together story. People could be chiming in now and thinking, okay, well, we have Blue Ivy, we have Rancher, and we have HashiCorp, right? Like, so that better together story and working together. They see us. We do this all the time, as resellers, as vendors, as partners, as OEMs, right? We all work together for a commonality, right? And I think that kind of speaks volumes when you're going out there and talking to other people. It's like, hey, I could take the best of breed from other ones and work together to create that ecosystem for you, right?
yeah, I think if you think about a Lego sets or kind of, especially Harry Potter, because they're all over my house. I don't know about
Love
you guys.
Harry
Okay.
Pop Funk.
So yeah, so right. So there's lots of Lego sets, and when you think about Lego sets, they should be like modular, composable. Like be able to work well with other systems and stuff. Like, because if you get one Lego set, and then Morgan tells me, Greg, sorry, I need you to go, completely different direction. This set doesn't work. Well, why can't I just take that Lego set and like add on to it? Adam, have you ever felt that way, just being in the trenches?
Wholeheartedly. And this is one of those things, especially in the federal government. A lot of things are moving out to the tactical edge, right? Being able to do compute out in the field as opposed to a data center is becoming more and more critical between, intermittent or no communications that are out there, or I want to be able to do data analytics at the tactical edge, right? But that being said, whenever you go out there and you're in an air-gapped environment running on the back of a Humvee, what needs to go in there is incredibly different than what's running in AWS cloud, right? So being able to hand pick and choose specific solutions that can kind of cater to both of those, while also implementing similar security postures on both of those, is incredibly, incredibly important in the federal government. That's one thing that, from our side of things, we've seen a lot of, and we try to manage things in a way that it's kind of pick and choose, and integration points, for instance, with a lot of the tools that Hashi has. That way, if somebody comes and is working in a very small form factor device, they're probably going to need a different set of tools than somebody running in the cloud. So wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Adam, I got to ask you a question. So I remember somebody came to me and they were trying to, get me the kind of buy into something. And they mentioned edge as a buzzword to me. And they said, they give me this big thing and they were like, here, this is our latest edge kit. And I just kind of looked at them, and then I looked over at my teammate, and we were like, just gritting our teeth. So what is edge?
That's a good question.
Thank you. I was about to ask that.
That's a great segue. Yeah. So edge means something different to every person that's out there, right? The way I try to carve it out, and this is one of those things I say, you can't define the edge. Let me try to define the edge. So I try to carve it out kind of in 3 pieces. It's what I call the near edge. You can think of that as kind of the larger data centers that are remote. And then you have the far edge. Those are larger form factor devices, but they have a pretty massive amount of compute, but they still might have connectivity issues and all that. And then you have the tactical edge. In my mind, those are three entirely different things. Like, for instance, I don't know if you can see it. I have 4 Raspberry Pi 4 CM4s running Kubernetes sitting right there, just because it's one of those things that the edge is incredibly difficult to define. But in my mind, being able to manage things like that, much like you would anywhere else, is the important piece. Because you're right. Someone might come to you and say, this is the edge, but they're basically just taking something running in a data center and hoping that you have enough compute there to be able to manage and maintain it, which, especially with the missions that I'm sure everyone here has seen, that's not always the case. So very good question. You guys have any opinions on that?
I have a question. So there's 3 different types of edges. Like you said, I love that you explained it like that, because I think that probably is why it means something different to everybody else, because there are these different categories and pillars. But what kind of, are they seeing the same problems, or what kind of problems are the different edges seeing, and how can we help them with this?
I could comment there. So I was in Tampa. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a yacht last year. Hopefully luck changes with Blue Ivy.
For you.
Okay.
We go to Annapolis. We're Annapolis people.
Okay. Well, we were in Tampa, and there was lots of, good stuff going on, demos and all that for Soft Week. And we heard the commander get up and he said that he wants to be, operators be more like Bond than Iron Man. And I thought it was really cool. Right. So I was like, okay, so what does that mean? Right. Kind of going back like the, the kind of quartermaster or penny. Okay. So how do we make stuff that's kind of like more like Bond than Iron Man? And, I think that comes to the naked person concept is what they described. And the idea is that, Morgan, if you call me and say, hey, Greg, I need you to go, I don't know, to Australia or Djibouti or somewhere. I just need to go and get in a plane and go there. And then somehow I need to get, a local device. And then that local device needs to do some things for the mission. So that, I wrote a paper in the Intelligence Community News about identity-aware proxies, and maybe next time Adam and I could demonstrate how you would do the, the naked person concept or something, because it's real easy. It's just, again, it's just people getting out of that comfort zone that I showed and actually wanting to try the tech, get behind it so that we could show how some of those capabilities work. But yeah, I think it's something like that, I think, is the edge, right? Like you have nothing and you might be picking up like a, micro processor or something, and it needs to do something cool.
I love your Iron Man reference. I'm just envisioning, the silver suitcase he carries that has his entire suit in. Yeah. Like that's what we want. I'm sure. Here we go. He's going to pull up the phone.
Yeah, he's going to pull something out. So while he's doing that, and I think of edge from another aspect, is what a lot of people I don't think about is. So you brought up a lot of good points, Adam. Right? So near edge, far edge, and tactical, right? Or what we used to always refer to as like fly away, right? And things like that is, think about like mercy ships. There it is right there.
Yeah, of course.
So these type of ships are hospitals at sea, right? And should they ever be attacked? Should anything ever happen? No. But guess what they have? They have redundancies built in on both sides of the ship. And then really as they're traversing and going around the globe and say, hey, their new port might be, Long Beach to, San Diego. And then all of a sudden, hey, disaster in New York, right? How do they offload that information in case something happens as they're traversing the world, right? And that's why when I think of edge, again, layman guy, Greg, I wasn't the dude running around telling the 11 Charlies did something. I was the 11 Charlie, right? So I kind of dumb it down to that as going, hey, that's edge, right? When I think about it is how do we also secure that data? Because also with hospital ships, that's a ton of personnel data, right? So as we do that and traverse it, edge is actually a really important thing. Everybody's mobile now, right?
Yeah. That's a big thing about like DevOps methodologies that I learned from 11 Charlies. Some of the platoons would not have their 11 Charlies with the 11 Bravos, and the way that.
What are those? Can we?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, some of us sorry, I don't speak Army.
Sorry, the 11 Charlies are the ones that go boom. So they drop a mortar and it goes boom, and then the 11 Bravos just close with and destroy.
Yeah.
So those are the two differences. But I noticed like some of the platoons, and I was just an outside observer, even though I was in, just kind of observing these things. And I noticed that like the Charlies would not do physical training with the Bravos. And I see that the same way as like with development and operations, like, or security, right? It's like if I'm writing something, like the developers a lot of times are the ones that are actually writing the security automation. So a lot of times security teams will get it, but they might not even know a lot about programming. So it can be like a silo there. But if you have those two teams train together and learn together, you're going to be a lot faster, right? Because when we would go on long movements, then the Charlies could keep up with the Bravos. Sorry, Mark, that wasn't a jab at Charlies, but I'm just having fun.
We were just way down the line. What can I say?
Okay, I want to go back to, I don't understand the naked person concept. And you said that you could explain it maybe next time. But when you were talking about that, you were talking about like you get a mission, you're on a plane, you're going and getting a local device somewhere. Right. How do we ensure security at that type of edge?
Yeah, that's great. So the idea is that there's a construct, that there's an inside and an outside. I would argue there is no inside and there is no outside.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Because I'm thinking about your comfort zones right now.
See, did you hear that Elon gave somebody a neural net today? I was actually the first person, so I'm actually I'm not. Right. So, but seriously, it kind of blows your mind a little bit when you think about it that way. But like, if you start to think about, you don't trust anything, so the only thing you trust is like math or cryptography, and everything's like a service. Then you can only, like, just because you go into the what is it, Hogsmeade, or you go into the castle at Harry Potter Land, and you can go to all the different rides. That's not authorized, right? Like, you have to have a different thing for every single thing you do, right? Now, it could be abstracted to the user, so you have a really good, mission profile or UX or whatever you want to call it. But unbeknownst to the user, there might be a token every time you click on an app. Like if you call your Uber for ATAC and you push the button, behind the scenes, there's probably a token or something, right, Adam?
Yeah, 100%. And generally speaking, the shorter lived those tokens are, the better off, right? Again, this is back in the day where when the internet was just getting started, if I sent a password, that password got sent every time. We live in a world now that every time I send a request across the internet, if you're doing security right, most likely at sending a token, that token's only good for a matter of seconds, right? So it's such an existential shift. And especially in the world of microservices, and if you don't know microservices, the best way to explain it is if you go to Amazon website, and every single box that's on their website is essentially a completely independent microservice managed by an entirely separate team. Each one of those microservices needs to be able to talk to the other microservices in a secure fashion using separate tokens just to isolate all those things. So wholeheartedly agree with that. One other thing I wanted to bring up about the edge before we go too far away from that, one thing we're seeing a lot of, to put edge in perspective, is the SATCOM play, right? In the sense that people always think about edge, especially in the federal government, like a Humvee or a wearable. We're seeing a lot of things around SATCOM now, in the sense that you're launching this device up into space. At best, you might have 5 minutes line of sight connectivity back to whatever it's trying to talk to. How do you do things like software updates and pushing configuration updates and all those things? There's so many challenges that come with that in today's age that no one even considered 6 months ago, 5 years ago, right? 5 years ago was we got to launch an entirely new satellite up there with new software. So it's exciting times, but there's definitely a lot of challenges that people don't realize.
I'm pretty pragmatic on that. In that, if you read the distributed manifesto from, I think it was Werner Vogel of Amazon, talked about how hard it is to actually move the microservices. I believe it even took Amazon, the store, quite a while to do it. I have to cite the paper, but I think that's part of that comfort zone slide that I showed, because like if you don't know you're using microservices, you're probably not. Because I got to tell a story about this, Adam. I talked to somebody once and they were running Kubernetes, and I asked them, I said, hey, what kind of service mesh are you using? And they said, we're not using a service mesh. And I said, oh, really? Are you sure? So I guess what I'm saying is sometimes you might have a software bill of materials and really not understand even what a microservice is. And then given a really, nimble company, it's still sometimes hard for organizations to move off of, Microsoft Active Directory, monolithic structures to microservices. Are you seeing the same thing, Adam?
Yeah, and that's one of those things. Modernizing an application or breaking a monolith down into microservices is in no way a trivial thing to do. Like it is probably one of the most complex things a program or an organization can do.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. Whenever we have folks come to us and they might be working in a traditional monolith, a lot of them aren't entirely ready to transition over to Kubernetes. Full disclosure, because at the end of the day, existentially, you're right. They have to kind of shift their mentality and say, all right, this isn't one code base anymore. We're breaking this down into modular parts and making sure that they talk to each other. And that kind of plays back into what I was saying before, that application modernization is incredibly difficult, but the payoffs for it in the long run, having a service mesh there to do things like ensure mutual TLS between components and ensure every piece of traffic inside of your system is encrypted. Also doing things like provide telemetry. So I know this is what's talking to this. This is how long it took. This is what isn't working. Having all that metadata that you didn't have prior to that is incredibly helpful when you're trying to make sure your system is both secured and functional. So wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a quick question, hopefully. Adam, you brought up service mesh when you were talking about security at the beginning when I said, what is security? Greg, you just said that you were shocked when this person you were talking to was like, we're not even using service mesh. What is that? What is service mesh?
Yeah, I think the first thing is take the word mesh, especially because, some of our conversation has been centered around veterans and public service. So a lot of times when you hear mesh, at least, if you're thinking back to that, mesh is around like radio mesh networks, right? Like, or mesh at layer 3 of the OSI model, if you're familiar, right? Or layer 3 and below. What Adam and I are talking about are up higher in the OSI stack. And what we're talking about is the services that we use. So like if you go to your cell phone and you push Uber to call an Uber, there's going to be a GPS service. There's going to be a database service. There's going to be a payment service, many, many different services in the Uber application. Those services are microservices, right? Those microservices are going to need to connect. Service A is going to have to connect to service B, and then those services, will be registered and they'll be able to communicate, right? So that kind of concept is where you want to start. Adam, I don't know if you want to add anything onto that.
Yeah. You could think of kind of the inner workings of a service mesh as this intricate spider web with all these things connecting to each other, right? If you didn't have the service mesh there, you still might be able to build out that connectivity, right? You might be able to come up with some hodgepodge manual process to say, just throw it out there. I know this IP is going to be this service. However, doing it consistently and securely is where the service mesh comes in. You could think of the service mesh as kind of sitting in front of each instantiation of each microservice and doing things like saying, I'm the sales microservice, but I need to reach out to the user microservice. I know I'm going to reach out there and I know I can do it securely because the service mesh is going to take care of how that traffic flows, the authentication between those endpoints and all of that. So
another way to think about it is like, are you on the mesh or off, and go back to intent. So Morgan, if you said, I intend for everyone in this region or everyone that is authorized, right, based on intent, you could then take that intent and cryptographically prove that if you're on the mesh, that all those services can connect to who you intend them to connect to. And that's powerful because, like he mentioned, the IP addresses, Internet Protocol addresses, they're more ephemeral now. So they come up and they come down. Containers make those things short-lived. So like if you don't want to spend your Friday with a spreadsheet, counting out IP addresses and understanding and sending emails about where they're all at,
I'm sure we all have.
You can automate that process, doing service discovery and registering each IP address with a service of some type.
And one thing to layer on that, because it gets thrown out a lot, and I don't know if everyone kind of knows what it is. I know there's a lot of federal requirements around it, is mutual TLS. And the kind of a layman's interpretation of what that means is that if there's one thing that needs to talk to another one, they both need to prove to each other who they are before they establish that connection. The way they do it is through digital signatures and cryptographic things. They call it a handshake, but it's literally, think of it as a handshake, right? In the sense that everything inside of your mesh, if there's a service talking to another service, both sides are going to validate the other side before they even are allowed to talk to each other. So that prevents things like a man-in-the-middle attack, where if a request gets intercepted and that man-in-the-middle tries to pass that request on, that cryptographic validation has been broken, so it'll immediately stop that request. That's one of the massive benefits of that service mesh. One of those things that's incredibly important to implement mutual TLS. So you know all the pieces that are talking to each other are constantly verifying and validating that the other side of that request is exactly who they said it is.
Okay.
Yeah, I know, man. Yeah, I'll jump in there. So Morgan, I know I'm listening. So it's kind of like, one, I just want to say for the record, like, I feel like I might be asking my kids this one day, like, are you on that mesh? Like, it sounds like when somebody said it and I was like, that's all I could think of in my mind, right? So I think this kind of goes back to like when we were talking at the beginning, we brought in the human factor, right? So now if I want to talk continued compliance and automation within it, you know, using a mesh limits some of the human touches that have or that used to occur, right? That allows me to go ahead and, hey, I'm going to automate those steps. So then I'm not having that human factor kind of do it. Like, hey, Greg, when we were in, you know, the Spec 4 Mafia, going in there and just kind of messing everything up, right? You know, like, sorry guys, all those guys out there I worked with, my apologies, but it's true, right? Like, hey, let's get that out of the way. And then the big application, like I think you brought up Uber, right? So now the database, that's really important, that, hey, I might need to update, move, like get more storage where I could concentrate on that instead of all this stuff, you know, those microservices within the mesh, right?
Right. It can reduce the cognitive load, because then you know that, you know, the whoever is creating that application or the commander has an intent, right? And then all you have to do is get on the mesh, right? And then there's a listed way to get on the mesh. Maybe you're getting on the mesh by provisioning it with infrastructure as code. Maybe you're getting on the mesh,
On the mesh.
right, by delivering.
Buzzword? Is that a buzz phrase?
Uh-oh,
Yeah,
uh-oh,
that's like 50 of them.
It is now.
Click,
It
click,
wasn't,
click,
it
click.
is now, yeah.
uh-oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Sorry, Greg.
Mark, you
So
bring up
Morgan, I
very-
guess the question is, Morgan, do you want to get on the mesh?
I think so. Okay, so I like my brain when you guys were explaining that, I was like thinking about like baking a cake, and then I was like thinking about being on the mesh and then off the mesh, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So it seems like the mesh, it helps things work well together. I appreciate, Greg, how you keep bringing it back to the Uber app, because I understand that. But also it seems that it has this additional layer of security.
Yep.
Like you're talking, is there an inside? Is there an outside? Are you on it? Are you off it? But it seems like if you're on it, you're inside some like layer of security.
I feel like this sounds like the Betty Ford Clinic. No, just saying.
Yeah. Yeah. So NIST actually defines it. So if you look at the Zero Trust, I think it's 207 something. I don't know. Too many acronyms, but I did write an article on it. It talks about the PDP and the PEP. I know more acronyms that NIST throws out, but it's basically the policy decision point and the policy enforcement point. Adam used a term called mutual TLS, which is different than TLS. TLS and MTLS are slightly different, kind of the same, maybe cousins. So using those things, you can actually have a different policy, use some of the telemetry that Adam talked about to make, you know, different decisions about whether service A should be able to talk to service B. Again, Morgan has an intent that, hey, I do want service A to talk to service B. So we're going to use a policy enforcement point, a policy, decision point, and we're going to say, hey, should these services be able to talk? And that's really the concept of this, what's happening in the mesh, because there is no inside and there is no outside. Those services are communicating cryptographically based on your intent.
And Mark brought up a very good point earlier. We might dive into compliance next, but I'll get that ball rolling. Compliance is sort of, in my mind, this is my interpretation of the validation of security, and making sure that your environment is actually up to the security standards that are defined for it. Back in the day, prior to having a service mesh there that offloads a lot of this, you had to implement all of those controls yourself. And when I was back to the Java microservices that I was managing, you had to have a cyber assessor sit next to you for 2 weeks every time there was a new microservice, because they had to go through every single control, because it's brand new, right? There's no, you're not getting any of the benefits of the infrastructure that's there, because all the security implementation was at the application layer. The benefit of the mesh and implementing the security controls at the platform level is that you get reciprocity for all of those things depending on the environment you're going to. So instead of you taking your entire application and having to take all of that through an ATO or an RMF process, you already have a lot of the controls checkboxed through the platform that you're deploying onto. The only thing you have to take through is that very small piece of business logic that you're laying on top.
I was gonna ask what like people or groups that aren't on a service mesh, like the problems that they're seeing. I feel like you guys have touched on it quite a bit. It seems like it takes a lot longer, it's less secure, etc. But what else?
Sure, I could start off. Yeah, I think so. The first thing is if you're not having anything automated, then you're having to do manual processes. Those manual processes are going to take a certain amount of time. That's going to take time away from your core mission or core business. So that's one element. And then the operational resilience, right? So if you have something that's on a mesh, we haven't got to talk about that, but the health points and the availability of something is one of the big keys, being able to horizontally scale. Let's say that you just have a simple LLM and a RAG. If you're not familiar with a RAG, it's just what keeps integrity of the LLM, right? So you're using a large language model, buzzwords, right? And say those are your two services just to keep it simple. You want to hit that endpoint 60,000 times a day, right? And you want to, be able to ask that endpoint to do prompt engineering or whatever you want to do. Those two services, every day you might have to stand those services up because they're running on a container. If those services go down, your 60,000 users might not be able to get there. You're going to have to do things. So your core business is not going to be able to function if you have an outage. The availability, the horizontally scale is another huge one, right? So if your requests go from, say there's no mission or it's not Black Friday, you might have a very low amount of requests to say, ask whatever LLM, your proprietary LLM, how many, how am I going to do this or whatever you're asking. But those requests could go up as your mission or as your business needs go up. So the ability to horizontally scale is another thing that a mesh would provide with automation.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit more on top of that, and Greg mentioned the OCI layers and how the mesh is in a much higher layer than some of the underlying networking. That also adds in a lot of metadata that the mesh itself is aware of, that if you didn't have the mesh there, you wouldn't be able to discern what it is. So what does that mean? The mesh, since it works at the layer it is at, you can do things like if a request is coming from one microservice to another microservice, you can actually check the body of that request. And for instance, if it has a social security number in it or something like that, just throwing out an example, it'd be able to block that request from ever getting to that destination application that's getting to. So it's far more aware of the requests that are coming in because it has a lot more metadata than if the mesh wasn't there to give you some added benefits on top of that.
And that's an actual example of the PDP or the PEP that NIST talks about as being zero trust, right? And that's a buzzword, but that's NIST defined it that way. So I guess it's not.
I feel like buzzwords are nice because I know they're not our favorites, but sometimes they're nice because I understand what you're saying rather than using an acronym that might not be as widespread. So I know that we have like 5 minutes left here. We've talked about a lot of stuff. I've learned a lot. So thank you guys for answering my questions and going down these rabbit holes. As we look to wrap up, are there any other topics that you want to touch on or anything else you want to talk about that you want people out there to understand about being that middleman between the mission stakeholders and the developers and bridging that gap?
I just like to thank Blue Ivy and Adam and, RGS has been awesome. Love to do this again. And maybe we could, build some things on the show or whatever it's going to be, but be happy to come back. So thanks.
Yeah. And again, I'm just guy in the middle, but I'm gonna throw this out there. Maybe the next one we say, the topic is, or the title is, are you on that mesh? I think
Do we have more to talk about the mesh? Could we talk about the mesh all day?
I feel like we really could, because I mean, I think we kind of started to allude to it, right? We started to have all those buzzwords. Hey, get that clicker going, man. I'm about to roast that thing, right? So like zero trust, right? Compliance, continuous AT. I mean, there's so many things I think we could talk about within that. So we got what, 3-4 hours on the next one? What?
No.
Absolutely. Buzzwords are buzzwords, but buzzwords are there for a reason, in the sense that they're kind of a high-level overview of what you actually want to talk about, what you actually want to focus on, right? So wholeheartedly agree as we kind of do more and more of these, diving into some of those buzzwords. So they're no longer a buzzword for those people. They actually understand what those mean. I think would be incredibly valuable.
Oh, I love that.
And I had a great time today. This was awesome. Looking forward to it.
Thanks so much for your time, guys. And those of y'all tuning in, thank you for your time. I hope that you learned as much as I did about the mesh and the edge and the different kinds of the edge. And yeah, next
time. Subscribe, and follow below. There you go.
I feel like, Greg, you need to put all of the references you made to articles you wrote in like the LinkedIn comments. So that we can all go back and reference them.
We can do whatever the verb is now, and I'm happy to get back to you. Thanks.
Greg's like, let me pull in my publisher. 1 second.
All right. Well, cool. Nice to chat, and then hopefully we'll see you guys again.
And one other plug, I think most of us are going to be at Rocky Mountain Cyber Symposium.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Mountains.
Yeah, Colorado Springs. I'm a Denver girly here, so I don't have very far to travel. But yeah, see you guys in real life IRL in, what is it, like 3 weeks?
Yep. 3 weeks. See you there.
You know what? I'll do another plug for that. I will tell you right now. So anybody into it and those little ball markers, whatever, we're going to have some out there. If you come up to me and just go, "Are you on that mesh, man?" I'm going to toss you one. I got to hear it. So seriously.
Wait, so did we start a new saying?
I think we might have. I'm just going to be like, "What's
Are you on? I want to be on that mesh. Like, after hearing you guys talk about it, I'd be horrified if somebody told me that they weren't on that mesh.
Got to get on that.
Wait, you're talking about golf, like ball markers for golf, right?
Yeah.
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah. They look like poker chips, so I mean, you can do whatever you want, but
one of those yet.
I'm just saying. It's not like I got to mark my ball, because then I got to actually be on the green, so whatever.
All right. Should we wrap it up?
Yeah, we can wrap it up. But hey, appreciate it. Thank you very much, Adam, Greg, Morgan. Thank you very much for hosting. And yeah, we'll see everybody on that mesh.
Bye, y'all.